people who have gone into a very off-limits area, what did you find? Was it off-limits for a good reason? In high school I went into the teacher's lounge. While every vending machine in the school had only water, in the lounge they had Coke, Pepsi machines. Got caught after buying my classmates sodas. What's the point of having multiple vending machines that all only sell water? It's a school, there have to be drinking fountains everywhere. When I was in the military we get lost in a training exercise. Ended up a good 5 kilometers away from where we were supposed to be and our fearless leader said fuck it, let's dig in for the op. Guess what we started to dig up? Guess? The fucker had taken us into a target practice range from WW2 used up until the Cold War ended. Within 15 minutes we had dug up half a dozen unexploded shells. Took us a good couple hours to backtrack out carefully. But not before we out the shells back in and covered them up. Nobody said a word about that night. Adams, I hate your pasty ass wherever you are. My CO once intentionally drove us, 7 guys in a 2-Vic convoy, into an impact area to inspect our carnage. On a pre-cleared EOD route of course, he wasn't retarded, we saw tons of UXO and managed to grab a sack full of mortar tail fins and the like. Not all who wander are lost. Except for the LT is fucking lost. Worked for a company who made the Patriot missiles. Exactly what you imagine. Looked like a lab from Stranger Things with different people working on different missile parts. Fucking Raytheon. It was in a castle in Wales. We were on the ground floor and there was a second floor with balconies. There was a staircase. So I hung back and let the tour group move on. I then climbed the staircase. It didn't lead to the balcony but to the roof. I sat for half an hour among the gargoyles, loving the view. Then I snuck down and blended in with a later group. It had to be off limits, but I'm glad I ignored the rules. I went behind the exhibits in the Queen Mary Museum and ended up walking the entire ship from stern to bow, all in non-public areas. Saw a lot of rusted steel and catwalks and bare hull. Also stumbled on a deserted ballroom. Accidentally walked into a room labeled corpse room in a hospital. How did you do that by accident? Did you just not read the sign? When I go to Vegas I always take the escalators to the second level in the hotels. Second level is almost always the conference level and you can usually get free food. If anyone asks who I am I say, isn't the electrician conference, so they think I'm lost and not a grifter. Most of the time nobody questions it. As a Vegas native that's one I use when I'm around any casinos. Not very off limits, so to say, but there's this haunted cliff thing by me, that apparently was a witch's sacrifice site and there's been suicides there and stuff and it's a little dangerous to get to because it's deep in the woods and rocky. Everyone made it out to be crazy stuff happen when you go there, the cliff glows, and all these wild folklore. It's so well known that cops patrol it regularly, the people who own the property it's on put signs everywhere and constantly monitor it. I went one night in the middle of the night and snuck up to see what all the hype was about with some friends. When we got there it was a normal massive rock, I wouldn't even call it a cliff, in the woods that wasn't very hard to get to. Nothing happened, besides the owners calling the cops on us. So yeah, it was off limits for a good reason, it's someone's property that isn't even slightly creepy or out of the ordinary and they don't want idiots like us there all the time. Airfield in Afghanistan. Some contractors let us on the flight line and gestured in the direction we needed to go. Ended up taking a wrong turn and driving around the big plane with the radar dish on top. Found some rifles. Pointed at us. After a brief but loud interrogation we were pointed in the right direction, i.e. that way you fucking retards, and the contractors got their peepees slapped. For a moment, the Air Force security forces were intimidating. That way you fucking retards. Ah, the military. So eloquent and articulate. I used to live on a very large military base in Europe, the largest of its kind in the world. I was allowed in because I lived on the base with my family, but the area was off limits to civilians. I found a shitload of bullet casings, some old Roman coins, Roman pots and an old submarine pen used from the Second World War. I harpooned an octopus in that submarine pen. Fun times. The areas I used to go snorkeling were off limits, mostly because of the Roman remains there. There was a very old Roman harbor dating back from early Roman to the fall of the Byzantine Empire. The entire sea floor was littered with fully intact pots which usually contained wine or grain. Coins could be found if you looked hard enough. I even found pygmy hippo and pygmy elephant remains and collected some of their bones. The Romans used them to carry things down to the harbor and load up boats. The military police used to occasionally chase us, but it's hard to chase a few kids in the ocean. We would just hide in the sea caves and make our way further along the coast. I do construction in malls, so I'm often in the off-limits areas. Mostly what's back there are massive electrical boxes that can kill you, the back entrances to stores, and the stored Santa, Easter Bunny displays. Nothing exciting. I live in a pretty spread out area just east of Toronto, Canada. There was a pretty popular spot called Camp 30. It was an old Canadian-run POW camp for German soldiers in World War II. Not overly off-limits, but definitely a strange area. If you were caught trespassing and authorities thought you didn't have a good enough reason to be there, you would normally be kicked off the property. Usually we'd get around this by bringing a camera and just say we were taking pictures for a school project. Nowadays the area is completely off-limits to the public and is enforced with higher security due to more dangerous conditions. Every visit you'd run into more than one group who had the same idea as you to visit the abandoned site. You'd sometimes stumble across groups or pairs while exploring the old buildings, or pass them along the roads. There would always be at least one group of teenagers there, simply to cause shit and illegal things like graffiti or shooting airsoft guns. We would typically avoid these people, more because they looked sketchy, not because we thought they would do anything to us. We would sometimes run into homeless people, or drug addicts hiding out alone in one of the buildings. It was never scary, we were always polite with them, and they were generally nice towards us. I remember most times just feeling bad for the individual, that they chose a decaying building to be alone and do their drug of choice. There were a few rooms that definitely always felt more eerie than most. There was a larger building, presumably an old gym. It had a large drained swimming pool in the main area. I remember that building because it was one of the only ones with a basement that was accessible. There was a boiler room with a crawl space in the wall about the size of a large room, but only half the height. My friends and I never entered that space, but there was always a really weird feeling around that room. I also recall a few people mentioning in the boiler room they felt like they were being watched. TLDR, old Nazi POW camp filled with teenagers and homeless people. I once broke into a fenced-off area of town where several water towers are housed, shimmied my way under a gap in the fence. My friend and I did this on a whim on 4th of July, and we climbed one of the towers and sat on top watching the fireworks show. It was really cool. Long time ago I used to be a security guard, rent a cop gig, at an alcohol production facility, been there since early 1800s. One of the old buildings, called rack houses, had its basement converted into water storage for emergency fire suppression systems, pump a ton of water in minutes kind of thing. Place held a lake underneath. When I first started, one of my routes I was shown was to go into this building, check the pumps and make sure no warning issues and whatnot, then leave same way I came in out, don't wander about. Okay, I work the night shift, and keep in mind these buildings do not have windows. After about a month of this gig, like anybody with a wandering mind and a troublesome curiosity, after checking the pumps I look down towards the back of the building. Now these buildings are big, I mean big. The pumps are in one corner of the building next to the door, so generally you're only in there for maybe 5 minutes max. And the pumps are the only are with light. So it's the middle of the night, minimum staff, I'm bored and point my rinky-dink flashlight at the far end of the building, might be able to see at best 20 feet into the darkness, lots of nothing. I start to walk in the direction towards the back, thinking to myself, why do they want people just in then out so quickly? I make it about a third of the way of the building when I hear what I can only describe as a breathy groan, moan. Like something a bear would make. I felt all the blood drain from my face, and I turn around and walk carefully but with a purpose, thinking for some reason that if I run it will get me. Not sure why, but every horror movie I have seen, that is typically what happens. I get near the door and I swear I hear things moving behind me, and I nope on out the last 10 feet like I folded space-time. Don't know what I heard, never cared to find out. Left that job a few months later, too much other weird crap in that place. Edit spelling. Hydrofluoric acid fumes. And yes, that's a good reason.